If this story keeps you listening, subscribe and tell me what horror story I should tell next. Let's begin. I want to be honest with you from the start. I wasn't a good man in 1888. I was 23 years old, and I'd been fired from 2 rail crews for fighting, dismissed from a lumber camp for theft, and the only reason the Forest Service hired me was because nobody with any sense wanted to spend 4 months alone on a mountain. They gave me the tower on Elk Ridge because I was the kind of man nobody would miss. I want you to understand that what I was, because it matters. The thing on that ridge didn't come for a brave man. It didn't come for a wise man. It came for a man who had nothing, feared nothing, and thought that made him dangerous. I know now what actually made me dangerous. I read the book, and then I did something none of the others had been stupid enough to do. I answered it. The ranger who brought me up was named Harlan Critchfield, and he talked the entire way. 3 hours on horseback up a switch trail that thinned to nothing past the second ridge, and the man never once stopped filling the silence. He told me about the prior season's fire count, about the supply schedule every 9 days, weather permitting, about the signal mirror protocol for daytime and the rocket flare procedure for emergencies. He told me what to eat first and what to save, and how to patch the roof when the October rains came in sideways. I wasn't listening to most of it. I was watching the trees. I'd worked timber in Oregon and rail in Montana, and I thought I knew what wilderness looked like. But the forest on Elk Ridge was different in a way I couldn't name at the time. The trees were old, not tall. Old, not impressive old, but wrong old. Thick and dark and close together in a way that felt deliberate, like they'd been planted in rows by something that didn't understand how forests were supposed to grow. The canopy was so dense that by the time we reached the upper trail, the afternoon light had gone gray and cold, and the horses had stopped nickering. Harlan didn't seem to notice. He was telling me about a lookout 2 ridges over who'd shot a bear from his tower platform and then had to climb down and butcher it alone in the dark. He thought this was funny. The tower appeared through a break in the trees like something that had washed up after a flood. A wooden box on stilts, 28 feet above a bald granite outcrop, with a railed platform on 3 sides and a shuttered lantern housing on the 4th. It looked like it had been built in a week by men who expected it to last a month. The logs were rough-hewn. The nails were already rusting. The stairs, more ladder than staircase, climbed the south face at a pitch that would kill you in ice. Harlan helped me carry the supply crates up. He showed me the lantern, a brass and glass kerosene model with adjustable shutters on all 4 sides. He showed me the log desk, the cot, the water barrel, the fire map pinned to the north wall with the grid coordinates for every drainage I was responsible for. He showed me the signal mirror, the flare box, and the tin of matches. Then he was standing on the platform with his hat in his hands, and the light was going amber behind him, and he said the thing that I'd later realize was the only part of his 3-hour lecture that mattered. "One more thing," he said. "After dark, keep the shutters closed on the lantern, all 4 sides. You can have light inside candles fine. Keep it low. Keep it away from the windows. But the lantern stays shuttered after sundown. Don't open it. Don't aim it at the trees." I asked him why. He put his hat back on. "It's the rule," he said. And then he said something else that I almost missed because he was already turning toward the stairs. The fellows who didn't follow it were found. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. He was already on the ladder. I heard the horses shift on the rock below, and then hoofbeats on the trail, and then nothing. I stood on the platform and watched the tree line darken. The forest started 30 yards from the tower's base in every direction except south, where the granite dropped away into a drainage valley. In every other direction, the trees came right up to the edge of the rock, like a crowd pressing against a fence. I lit the lantern. I closed the shutters. Not because I believed the rule, but because I had nothing else to do. That was my first night. The first 3 days were the emptiest stretch of time I'd ever lived through. I don't mean peaceful. I don't mean quiet. I mean empty. Like the hours had been scooped out and what was left was just the shell of a day with nothing inside it. I woke at dawn. I scanned the ridges for smoke. I ate. I logged the weather on the forms Harlan had left. I scanned again. I ate. The sun moved. The shadows moved. Nothing else did. By the second night, I was talking to myself, and by the third morning, I was answering. That's when I found the board. I was on my knees scrubbing the floor with a rag, not because the floor needed scrubbing, but because my hands needed something to do. And I felt one of the planks shift under my weight. It was near the northwest corner, under the cot. A short board, maybe 18 inches, that had been cut and replaced with no nails holding it down. Just friction and the weight of the cot frame keeping it flush. I pried it up. Underneath, in the shallow gap between the floor and the support beam, was a book. Not a proper book, a ledger. The kind you'd buy in a general store for keeping accounts. Cloth-bound, about the size of a Bible, with no title or marking on the cover. The cloth was stained dark with moisture and age, but the pages inside were mostly legible. Someone had wrapped the book in a square of oilskin before hiding it. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small and careful. The date at the top read June 14th, 1866. The entry was brief. It said, "I have been on the tower 9 days. On the 7th night, I heard something below the platform that I could not identify. It was not wind. It was not animal. It moved around the base of the tower for approximately 2 hours. I did not open the lantern. I followed the rule. In the morning, I found marks on the northwest support beam. 3 parallel gouges, roughly 4 inches apart, cut into the wood to a depth I could not replicate with my belt knife. I am recording this because I do not know what else to do with the information." That was the entire entry. No name, no further context. I turned the page. The next entry was dated August 1866. Same handwriting. Shorter. It said, "Night 7 again. Same sounds. New marks on the northeast beam. I am leaving at the end of the month." I turned more pages. The handwriting changed. A new lookout. A new year. 1868. This one wrote more 2 full pages about the silence of the forest, the absence of animals near the tower after sundown, the way the temperature dropped on certain nights in a way that felt localized, as if the cold was coming from a specific direction rather than from the sky. I kept reading. The entries spanned decades. Different hands, different years, different men. But the same tower, the same ridge, the same things described again and again, with the consistency of men who had no reason to lie and no audience to perform for. Then I reached 1874. The handwriting was different from all the others. Looser, more natural. The man wrote the way a person talks when they're comfortable being alone. His first entry was dated May 2nd, 1874, and it began, "Well, they've put me on Elk Ridge, and the tower smells like a wet dog died in a boot. The view is something, though. I can see clear to the sawtooth line on a good morning. Found a ledger under the floor that the previous tenants have been scribbling in. Read the whole thing in one sitting. These boys have got themselves spooked by something, and I can't say I blame them. Spend enough time alone up here, and your own heartbeat starts to sound like footsteps. But I'll play along and add my own observations, if only because writing to you all is better than talking to the walls." I liked him immediately. I don't say that about many people, and in 1888, I would not have said it about anyone. But the 1874 lookout, I never learned his name from the logbook. He never wrote it, had a way of describing things that made you feel like you were sitting across from him. He wrote about the birds that visited his platform railing, about the way fog settled into the drainage valley at dawn, like milk poured into a bowl, about the specific quality of silence at 11,000 feet. Not the absence of sound, he wrote, but the presence of a larger quiet that made your own sounds feel like interruptions. He wrote every few days. Some entries were long, some were a single line. On June 9th, 1874, he wrote, "Heard the sounds the others described. 7th night on the nose. I'll be damned." His tone stayed steady for weeks, curious but unafraid, clinical where the others had been anxious. He documented the marks on the support beams. He measured them. He noted that they were deeper than the previous year's marks, as if whatever was making them was applying more pressure, or had grown. Then, tucked between 2 pages like a bookmark, I found the letter. It was written on different paper thinner, personal stationery, folded into thirds. The handwriting matched the 1874 lookout's entries. It was addressed to my dearest Clara, and it began with an apology for missing her 7th birthday. It was a letter to his daughter. I won't recite the whole thing. There are parts of it that don't belong to me and never will. But I will tell you that he described the view from the tower for her. He told her the mountains looked like the teeth of a sleeping giant, and that the clouds got caught on them like cotton on a fence. He told her he was saving a pine cone for her that was as big as her head. He told her he would be home before the snow came, and that he would bring her something from the mountain that no other girl in the territory would have. He signed it, "Your father, who thinks of you with every sunrise." The letter had never been sent. It was still in the book. He'd used it as a bookmark, and then, I think, forgotten it. Or maybe not forgotten. Maybe he kept it close because writing to her was the same as being near her, and the book was where he spent his nights. I put the letter back between the pages. I kept reading. His entries changed in July. The humor thinned. The observations became shorter and more focused. On July 18th, 1874, he wrote, "I have been conducting an experiment that I suspect is unwise." On the 7th night, instead of shuttering the lantern entirely, I left the south shutter open a crack, no more than a finger's width, and watched the tree line through the gap. I did not use the lantern's full beam. I only watched. I saw nothing. But I felt something that I will try to describe honestly. I felt seen, not watched. Seen. The way you feel when someone in a crowded room has found your face and is holding it. I closed the shutter. The feeling stopped. I will not do this again. He did it again. His entry from August 1874 described a second attempt. The shutter opened slightly wider, for slightly longer. This time, he saw something. He described it in a single line that I read 4 times. There is a shape at the tree line that is not a tree and is too large to be anything I can explain. His final entry was dated August 19th, 1874. It was the longest thing he'd written. The handwriting started controlled and then deteriorated not gradually, but in a collapse, like a man whose hands began shaking mid-sentence and never stopped. It described sounds on the tower stairs, weight on the platform, the lantern shutters rattling inward, not from wind, but from pressure applied to the outside. And then a line that was almost illegible. "It is at the window. It is looking in. It knows I looked first. God help me. It knows I..." The entry stopped. The pen had dragged a long, thin scratch across the remainder of the page, as if the hand holding it had been pulled away. I closed the book. I sat on the cot. I looked at the shuttered lantern. I looked at the window. I looked at the tree line, which was already going dark. And for the first time in my life, I felt something that I had to be honest enough to call fear. I want to make something clear. I did not believe the logbook. Not fully. I was afraid, yes, but I was afraid the way you're afraid of a noise in an empty house. The body responds before the mind agrees. My mind had not agreed. I was a man who had spent years sleeping in bunkhouses, in rail camps, in timber shacks where the rats outnumbered the men. I had been in 2 knife fights, and in both cases, I was the one holding the knife at the end. I did not consider myself a man who was vulnerable to ghost stories written by lonely, frightened strangers, but I counted the nights. I'd arrived on a Monday. Harlan had delivered me in the late afternoon. That was night 1. The logbook entries, every single one of them, across every year, and every handwriting described the first disturbance on the 7th night. I didn't believe it, but I counted. Night 4 was when the counting stopped being theoretical. I was on the platform after supper, sitting in the chair Harlan had left, watching the last light drain out of the sky. The forest was doing what it always did at dusk, going quiet in stages, like an audience settling before a performance. The birds stopped first, then the insects, then the wind, which on Elk Ridge seemed to obey a schedule as rigid as anything in the Forest Service manual. Then I heard it. It was not a sound I could identify, and I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only weapon I have against the possibility that I imagined it. It was low. It was sustained. It came from the tree line to the northwest, the same direction the 1866 lookout had described, the same direction every subsequent entry had noted. It was not an animal call. It was not wood settling or rock shifting. It was resonance, a deep, tonal vibration that I felt in my molars and in the platform boards under my boots before I heard it with my ears. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Then it stopped. The silence after it was not the same silence as before. It was heavier, denser, like the forest had taken a breath and was holding it. I went inside. I closed the door. I did not open the lantern shutters. I lit a candle, kept it below the window line as Harlan had instructed, and I sat on the cot with the logbook in my lap. I reread the 1866 entry. It was not wind. It was not animal. I reread the 1868 entry. The temperature dropped on certain nights in a way that felt localized. I reread the 1874 lookout's first encounter entry. 7th night on the nose. This was night 4, not night 7. The logbook was clear. The 7th night was when it began. But the sound I'd heard was exactly what they described. Either the cycle had shifted, or the cycle was not the only pattern. I slept poorly. At dawn, I went down the ladder to check the support beams. The marks were there. 3 parallel gouges on the northwest beam, just as the 1866 lookout had described. 4 inches apart. Deep enough that I could fit the tip of my index finger into each groove. The wood inside the gouges was fresh, pale, splintered, raw. These marks had not been there when I'd arrived. I had checked the beams on my first day, not out of suspicion, but out of the habit of a man who has learned to inspect the thing he's standing on. I went to the northeast beam. Nothing. The south beam's nothing. Only the northwest. Only the side facing the deepest part of the tree line. I climbed back up. I opened the logbook. I compared the 1866 lookout's description of the marks, 3 parallel gouges, roughly 4 inches apart, with what I had just seen. It was not roughly 4 inches apart. It was exactly 4 inches apart. I'd measured with my hand span, the same distance on the same beam, 22 years later. Whatever was making these marks had not changed, not its method, not its reach, not its precision. That evening, I performed my usual scan of the ridges for smoke. As the light faded, I began to shutter the lantern for the night. I reached for the northwest shutter, the one facing the deep tree line, and stopped. It was already open. I had closed it at sundown. I remembered closing it. I closed the shutters in the same order every night: north, east, south, west, then the northwest corner housing. It was habit. I had closed it. It was open, not fully, perhaps 2 inches. Enough that a narrow beam of lantern light was streaming out into the darkness, cutting across the platform railing and reaching the first row of trees like a bright finger laid against the dark. I closed it. I checked the latch. The latch was intact. It had not failed. It had been opened. I sat in the dark, and I reread the 1874 lookout's letter to his daughter. I read the part about the mountains looking like the teeth of a sleeping giant. I read the part about the pine cone. I read the signature, your father, who thinks of you with every sunrise. And I felt something move in my chest that I had no experience with and no name for. This man had sat where I was sitting. He had heard what I was hearing. He had loved someone enough to write a letter this tender in a place this desolate, and something had taken him from that love and left him hollow. The logbook said the 7th night was when it came. I had 3 nights to decide what kind of man I was. I spent the next day doing something I'd never done with any problem in my life. I sat down and I thought. I took the logbook to the desk, and I went through every entry from the beginning, not reading for story this time, reading for data. I logged each date, each night number, each described event. I made a chart on the back of one of Harlan's fire report forms, a grid with the years down the left side and the nights across the top. The pattern was exact. Every lookout who documented their experience reported the first anomaly on night 7, not night 6, not night 8, 7. The anomalies escalated on subsequent cycles. Night 14 brought sounds closer to the tower. Night 21 brought physical contact with the structure, and by night 28, the entries either stopped or became the kind of writing that a man produces when his hands are shaking too violently to control the pen. But I had heard the sound on night 4. I went back through the entries looking for any mention of earlier onset. There was nothing. Every account was consistent. 7, 14, 21, 28, which meant one of 2 things. Either I was wrong about which night it was, and I was not wrong. I had scratched a mark into the platform railing for each sunset, and there were 4 marks, or something about my presence on this tower was different from every man who had come before me. I sat with that thought for a while. Then I found the torn pages. I had handled the logbook dozens of times by then, but always reading forward, turning pages left to right, following the entries in sequence. I had never examined the spine. When I did, holding the book open and pressing it flat against the desk, I saw what I had missed. Between every handwritten entry, there were remnants. Thin strips of paper, ragged-edged, pressed into the binding. Torn pages, not fallen out, torn out. Deliberately, carefully, close to the spine, so that only a fraction of each page remained. I counted them. There were 31 torn remnants distributed throughout the book, roughly 1 for every 2 entries. The pattern was regular. Entry, torn page, entry, torn page, as if the book had originally alternated between 2 types of content, and one type had been systematically removed. I held the book up to the window light and examined the remnants. On 3 of them, I could see the faint edge of handwriting. Not the handwriting of any lookout. The strokes were different, heavier, wider, applied with a pressure that had slightly embossed the neighboring pages. Whoever or whatever had written on those pages had pressed hard enough to leave ghost impressions on the sheets that remained. I angled the logbook against the light and ran my thumb across the page that followed the 1874 Lookout's final entry. I could feel the indentations. Faint, but there. I took a pencil and did what any man with a criminal's resourcefulness would do. I rubbed the graphite lightly across the surface, the way you'd take a rubbing from a gravestone. Letters appeared. Not English. Not any alphabet I recognized, but structured, consistent, repeated symbols. Whatever had been written on the removed page had been written in a language, not in random marks. It had grammar. It had syntax. I could see where the symbols repeated, where they grouped, where they spaced. The logbook was not a record. The logbook was a conversation. Every entry I'd read the frightened testimony of lookout after lookout, year after year, was one half of an exchange. The other half had been written on the facing pages in a hand that did not belong to any man. And someone had gone through the book and torn out every response, gutted the dialogue, left only the human voices, so that what remained looked like documentation instead of correspondence. I sat back in the chair and I stared at the wall, and I understood three things simultaneously. First, the creature was not merely present on this ridge. It was literate. It had been responding to human writing with writing of its own, using a system of marks that constituted a language. Second, someone the Forest Service, a previous lookout, someone with access to the book, had deliberately removed the creature's half of the conversation. They had done this not to destroy the information, but to prevent future lookouts from reading the responses. To prevent us from understanding what the creature was saying. To prevent exactly the kind of comprehension I was now developing. Third, the cycle wasn't 7 nights because of some biological rhythm or territorial patrol. The cycle was 7 nights, because that was how long it took the creature to compose a response. Every lookout who arrived wrote something in the logbook within their first week, if only a note about the weather, the isolation, the strangeness. And 7 days later, the creature replied. The sounds, the marks on the beams, the presence at the tree line, those weren't attacks. They were deliveries. The creature came to the tower on night 7 to write in the book, and I had heard it on night 4 because I had started reading on my 3rd day. It knew I had found the book. It knew I was reading, and it had adjusted its schedule. It was early because I was early. I should have left. Any rational man would have descended the trail at first light and been at the base camp before noon and on a horse heading south before dark. I know that. I knew it then. But I have to tell you about the letter again, because the letter is why I stayed. I read it once more that evening. The 1874 lookout's letter to his daughter Clara. The pine cone as big as her head. The mountains like the teeth of a sleeping giant. The promise to come home before the snow. And I thought about what Harlan had told me, that the men who broke the rule were found. I thought about the 1874 lookout's final entry, the handwriting falling apart, the sentence that ended mid-word. And I thought about a 7-year-old girl waiting for a father who came home with open eyes and a closed mind, who lived for 27 more years and never recognized her face. Something had done that to him. Not killed him, that would have been kinder. Something had reached into him and taken the part that knew his daughter's name. I was not a good man. I have said this. But I had read this man's letter, and I had sat in his chair, and I had heard his voice in every entry he wrote, and the anger I felt was the cleanest thing I had ever felt in my life. I did not close the shutters on night 7. The sun dropped behind the western ridge at 7 minutes past 6. I know the time because I logged it. The sky went the color of a wound, deep red, arterial, streaked with clouds that looked like they'd been clawed into place. The forest canopy turned black beneath it. The trees lost their individual shapes and became a single dark mass, a wall of shadow pressing against the granite clearing from every direction except south. I lit the lantern. I opened the northwest shutter. Not a crack. Fully. I swung it wide on its hinge and let the beam reach out across the platform, over the railing, across 30 yards of bare rock, and into the first row of trees. The light hit the trunks and stopped. The forest was so dense that the beam penetrated no more than 10 feet before the darkness swallowed it. I could see bark. I could see the lowest branches. I could see the ground between the trunks, carpeted in needles and shadow. I stood on the platform with the lantern at chest height, and I waited. The temperature dropped. Not gradually. It felt like something had opened a door to a colder room. My breath, which had been invisible a moment earlier, became a pale cloud in front of my face. The wood under my boots contracted with a sound like knuckles cracking. The silence changed. I have tried for 60 years to describe what that silence sounded like, and the closest I can come is this. It was the silence of something listening. Not the absence of sound, the active suppression of it, as if every insect, every bird, every small creature in a mile radius had simultaneously decided that making noise was no longer safe. Then the trees moved, not the branches, not the canopy, the trunks. The black shapes at the edge of the lantern light shifted, 2 of them separating from the mass and moving laterally, slowly, as if the forest were rearranging itself to make room for something that needed to pass between. And then it was there. I'm going to describe what I saw as clearly as I can, because I owe that to the men who saw it before me and were not believed. It stood at the tree line. It did not emerge from between the trees. It was simply there, as if it had always been there, and the darkness had only now pulled back far enough for the light to find it. It was enormous. I'm not a man who uses words loosely, and I tell you it was the largest living thing I have ever seen. Its head was above the canopy, not slightly above, fully above. The tallest pines on that ridge were 60, perhaps 70 feet. This thing's head cleared them the way a man's head clears a table. Its body was dark, not black dark the way stone is dark, the way bark is dark after rain. It had texture. I could see ridges and grooves and what looked like the growth rings of a tree scaled to the size of a cathedral pillar. Its skin, if it was skin, had the quality of something geological, ancient, minerite, layered by centuries of slow accumulation. But it was alive. I knew this because of the light. Faint lines of luminescence ran through its body like veins, pale blue, the color of a glacier seen from underneath. They pulsed. Not rapidly, slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat measured in minutes rather than seconds. It had wings. I say wings because I have no other word, but they were not the wings of any bird or bat. They were vast, ragged structures extending from its back, skeletal and membranous, with the look of dead trees. Bare branches stretched between thin membranes of something that was not skin, and not fabric, and not anything I could name. They did not move. They hung at its sides like the canopy of a ruined cathedral. Its head was the worst part. It had horns, antlers, a crown of branching protrusions that looked like they had grown rather than formed organic, asymmetric, covered in the same stone bark texture as its body. Its face was long and angular, with a jaw that I could see even at that distance was built for something I did not want to imagine. Smoke or mist curled from the corners of its mouth, and its eyes, 2 points of amber light, deep-set, steady, unblinking, were looking directly at me. Not at the tower. Not at the lantern. At me. I knew this the way you know when someone across a room is staring at the back of your head. There was no ambiguity, no possibility that it was gazing in my general direction, and I happened to be in the path. Its focus was specific, personal. It had found my face in the lantern light, and it was holding it the way the 1874 lookout had described, the way someone in a crowded room locks onto you and doesn't let go. It did not move. I don't mean it was still the way an animal is still before it bolts or strikes. I mean it was still the way a mountain is still. Absolute. Patient. Grounded in a stillness that suggested it had been standing there for longer than I had been alive, and that my presence was of precisely as much consequence to it as a single match struck in a cathedral. But it was watching. And in the watching, there was something that I need to name accurately, because it is the part that the logbook entries never captured, and the part that has stayed with me for 61 years. There was recognition. Not curiosity. Not aggression. Recognition. It looked at me the way a man looks at something he has been expecting. The way you look at a letter you've been waiting for when it finally arrives. I stood there for what might have been 5 minutes, and might have been 30. The lantern burned. The creature watched. The forest held its silence. Then I went inside and sat on the cot, and did not move until dawn. Harlan came on the 9th day, as scheduled. I heard the horses on the lower trail an hour before he appeared, and I climbed down and met him at the base of the tower with the supply manifest in one hand and the logbook behind my back in the other. He looked at me the way you look at a dog that's been left out in the rain, not with pity, but with a kind of resigned confirmation. He'd expected to find me like this, pale, underslept, holding something I shouldn't have. "You found it," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. I brought the logbook around and held it up. He didn't reach for it. He looked at it the way you'd look at a snake, not with fear exactly, but with the caution of a man who knows what it can do. "How much did you read?" he asked. "All of it, including the entries that someone tore out. I found the edges. I did pencil rubbings on the indentations. I know the book was a two-way exchange. I know the pages were removed." Harlan sat down on a rock. He took his hat off. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, without looking at me, "The service placed those books in every tower on the ridge. Been doing it since '64, when the first tower went up." The original idea was documentation. If something happened to a lookout, the book would tell us what. It was supposed to be a logbook. Fire sightings, weather, wildlife. "That's not what it became," I said. "No, it was not." He paused. "The first lookout on this tower wrote his weather notes and went to sleep. On his 7th morning he found writing in the book that wasn't his. He thought someone had climbed up in the night and played a trick. He was angry about it. He wrote a complaint in the book addressed to whoever was sneaking up his tower. The next 7th night, there was a response. In the same hand? In the same hand. In marks that weren't English. Weren't anything. But structured. Consistent. He picked up a stone and turned it in his fingers. It went on like that for 2 seasons. The lookout would write. The thing would answer. Back and forth. The lookout started trying to decode the responses. He made charts, symbol frequency tables. He thought he was making progress. What happened to him? Harlan put his hat back on. Found him at the base of the tower in October '66. Alive, eyes open, breathing, heart beating. Not a mark on him. Carried him down to the settlement on a stretcher. He never spoke, never wrote, never responded to his own name. lived another 12 years in a home in Salem. His wife visited every Sunday. He never looked at her. I thought about the letter, the pine cone as big as her head, and the service kept sending men up. The service placed the books. The service gave the rule. The service sent men every season for 24 years. He looked at me. You want to know why? I want to know why the pages were torn out. He was quiet again. Longer this time. The service tore them out, he said finally. Every resupply, every end-of-season retrieval. The ranger assigned to the ridge was instructed to check the book, remove any pages that weren't in a lookout's hand, and deliver them to the district office in a separate envelope. They were collecting the creature's responses. They were collecting them, cataloging them, sending them to a university back east, I don't know which one. Men with degrees were studying the symbols, trying to decode them. The logbooks were the source material, and the lookouts were... He stopped. The lookouts were bait, I said. The service wasn't documenting encounters, it was conducting them, sending men up to write in the book so the creature would write back, and then harvesting the responses while the men who provoked those responses were found staring at walls for the rest of their lives. The anger I had felt reading the 1874 lookout's letter came back. But it was different now. When I'd been angry before, it had been at the creature, at the thing that had reached into a man and taken his daughter's name out of his head. Now the anger split, half for the creature, half for the men in offices who had weighed a lookout's mind against a page of symbols and decided the symbols were worth more. The rule, I said, don't shine the lantern after dark. Harlan nodded. The rule was real. It worked. Every man who kept his light inside and didn't engage, didn't look, didn't search, didn't try to see, it survived his season intact. The creature wrote in the book regardless. It came on the 7th night regardless. But if the lookout didn't acknowledge it, didn't look at it, didn't invite the exchange, the creature took its page and left. And the ones who looked were found. What does found mean, Harlan? Exactly. He stood up. He brushed the dust from his trousers. It means they were found, sitting at the base of their towers with the logbook open in their laps, turned to the creature's most recent entry. Their eyes were open. They were reading, and they never stopped reading. Whatever they saw on that page in those symbols, in whatever language that thing uses, it was the last thing their minds ever processed. They got stuck, like a machine with a gear jammed. The wheels still turn, but nothing moves. He started toward the horses. Then he turned back. You said you did pencil rubbings of the indentations. I did. His face changed. It was the first time I'd seen fear on Harlan Critchfield. And it was not the theatrical fear of a man telling ghost stories. It was the practical fear of a man who understands a specific mechanical danger. Burn them, he said. Burn the rubbings. Don't look at them again. Don't try to read the symbols. The page doesn't have to be there. The impression is enough. The pattern is enough. Enough for what? Enough to get stuck. He mounted his horse. He looked down at me from the saddle with an expression I would not understand for another 40 years. The expression of a man who knows he's leaving someone in a place they shouldn't be, but who has no authority to remove them, and no ability to explain the full scope of what he knows. Keep the shutters closed, he said. Stop reading the book. Finish your season. Go home. I watched him ride down the trail until the trees swallowed him. Then I went back up the tower and opened the logbook to the 1874 lookout's last entry. I read the sentence that ended mid-word. I looked at the torn edge of the page that followed the page that had contained the creature's response to that final, terrified entry. I thought about a man reading symbols that jammed his mind like a broken gear. I thought about a daughter who visited a breathing corpse every Sunday. I thought about offices full of men with degrees studying pages purchased with human minds. And I decided that I was going to do something that no lookout had done before. Not because I was brave. I wasn't. Not because I was curious. I'd moved past curiosity into something harder and more reckless. I was going to write back. I waited until the evening. I don't know why I waited, instinct maybe, or the sense that what I was about to do should happen in the dark, where the creature could see it happening in the terms it understood. I sat at the desk with the logbook open to the first blank page after the 1874 lookout's final entry. I picked up the pencil, and I wrote. Not a log entry, not testimony, not documentation. A direct address. I wrote, I know what you are. I know you write in this book. I know the pages were taken. I know what you did to the men who came before me. The man in 1866 who spent 12 years staring at a wall, and the man in 1874 who never recognized his own daughter again. I have read his letter to her. He loved her more than anything in his life, and you took that from him. I don't know what you are. I don't know what you want. But I know what you did, and I am not going to look away from it. I am not going to follow the rule. I am not going to pretend you are not there. You are there. I see you. And if you have something to say to me, say it in a language I can read, because I am done decoding your marks, and I am done being afraid. My name is Samuel Harwick, and I am the 12th man on this tower, and I am still here. I put the pencil down. I left the logbook open on the desk. I opened every shutter on the lantern, all 4 sides, full wide, so that light poured out of the tower in every direction like a beacon. Then I sat on the cot and I waited. Nothing happened for 3 hours. The forest was silent. The temperature was steady. The lantern burned. I sat with my back against the wall, and I watched the open logbook on the desk, and I waited for something that I was not certain would come, and not certain I would survive if it did. At 11 I had a pocket watch, and I checked it obsessively through that long vigil. The temperature dropped. Not like before. Not the slow, localized chill of a cold pocket drifting down from the ridge. This was immediate. Total. The air inside the tower went from cool to freezing in the span of a single breath. My exhale turned to fog. The moisture on the inside of the windows crystallized into feathers of frost. The lantern flame shrank, not flickered. Shrank as if the oxygen feeding it had thinned. Then I heard the tower move. I don't mean I heard a sound on the tower. I mean I heard the tower itself. The structure, the beams, the nails, the platform shift. The way a ship shifts when something passes beneath it in deep water. A low structural groan that came from everywhere at once. The floor tilted perhaps 2 degrees to the northwest. My water cup slid 3 inches across the desk. Something was leaning against the tower. No, something was gripping the tower. The groan came again, louder. The northwest wall bowed inward not much, perhaps an inch, but I could see it. The planks flexed. Dust fell from the ceiling joints. The nails in the wall boards began to sing a thin, metallic whine as the wood around them compressed. Then, climbing. I heard it below me, on the support beams, on the cross braces. Weight being applied and released in sequence. Not fast. Methodical. One grip, then another. The tower swayed with each transfer of weight, a slow, rhythmic pendulum motion that I felt in my stomach. Whatever was climbing was enormous and was making no effort to conceal itself. It climbed the way a man walks down his own hallway, without urgency, without stealth, because there was no need for either. The logbook's pages moved, not from wind. The shutters were open, but the air was dead, still frozen, crystallized, motionless. The pages turned by themselves. slowly, one at a time. I watched them from the cot. The book was 10 feet away on the desk. The pages turned forward past every entry I had read, past the 1866 lookout, and the 1868 lookout, and the 1874 lookout's final terrified scrawl, past all of it, until they reached my entry. My words. My name. The pages stopped. The climbing stopped. The tower was still. I could hear breathing, not mine. Mine had stopped. This was something else vast, slow, wet. It came from directly outside the northwest wall, not below me, not above me, level with me. Whatever had climbed the tower was now suspended on the outside of the structure, its face, if it had a face, separated from mine by 3 inches of pine board. The breathing fogged the window. I could see it. The frost on the glass melted in a circle the size of a dinner plate, replaced by condensation from a breath that was warm and carried a smell I will describe as accurately as I can. Minerals. Hot stone. The deep, buried scent of the earth's interior, as if something that lived underground had exhaled the memory of volcanic rock. The lantern went out. Not slowly. Not by wind. The flame simply ceased. The wick was intact. The fuel was full. The flame stopped as if the concept of combustion had been revoked in the immediate vicinity of the tower. I was in total darkness. And in the darkness, the logbook began to fill. I couldn't see it. I could hear it, the scratch of something moving across paper. Not a pencil, not a pen. Something harder. Something that cut into the page as it wrote. The sound was continuous, not the stop and start of a hand forming letters. A single unbroken line of inscription, as if whatever was writing did not need to lift its instrument between symbols, as if the entire message was one connected mark. It wrote for a long time. Minutes. I sat on the cot in the dark and listened to the sound of something on the other side of the wall, writing a response to the first direct address it had received in 24 years of correspondence. Then the writing stopped. The breathing stopped. The tower settled. The tilt corrected. The temperature began, slowly, to rise. I did not move until dawn. I did not light the lantern. I did not approach the desk. I sat on the cot with my back against the east wall, the wall farthest from where the breathing had been. And I waited for the sun to come up with the patience of a man who understands that patience is the only thing keeping him alive. When the light came, it came slowly. Gray first, then blue, then the pale gold of an October morning on a mountain where nothing should have been wrong, and everything was. I stood up. My legs had cramped from 7 hours of stillness. I crossed the room to the desk. The logbook was open. The pages had been turned past my entry to the next blank sheet. It was no longer blank. The writing covered the entire page, both sides. And it continued onto the next page, and the next 3 full pages of dense, heavy inscription in the hand I had seen ghost traced in my pencil rubbings. The same symbols, the same structure. But these were not impressions. These were direct marks, cut into the paper with enough pressure to score the desk surface beneath. And they were not in the creature's language. They were in English. I need you to understand what that means. Every previous entry by the creature, every page that the Forest Service had harvested over 24 years, had been in its own system of symbols, an alien language that university men had been unable to decode. That was what the lookouts received. That was what jammed their minds. That was what the creature had always written. But I had asked it to write in a language I could read, and it had. I sat down. I read. What the creature had written was not a message. It was not a threat. It was not a negotiation, or a greeting, or an explanation. It was an inventory. It began with a name, William Cartwright, 1866. Beneath the name was a list, not of events, not of encounters, of qualities, specific, precise, clinical qualities. His patience threshold, his fear response time, his curiosity index, measured in days before he first tried to look outside. His breaking point, the exact night, and the exact stimulus that caused his mind to lock. And then, in a phrase that I read 3 times before I accepted what it said, yield, 34 years, residual cognition, harvested. The next name, Thomas Dane, 1868. Same format, same clinical inventory, same final line, yield, 12 years residual cognition, harvested. The next, Arthur Pell, 1871. Same, yield, 27 years residual cognition, harvested. I kept reading. Every lookout who had been found was listed. Name, qualities, breaking point, yield. The years of residual cognition, the years each man had lived after being found, alive but empty, staring at walls, breathing without thinking, were recorded with the precision of an accountant noting the output of a mine. The creature was not communicating with the lookouts. It was feeding on them. The logbook was not a dialogue, it was a menu. The creature's entries, the symbols the Forest Service had been so desperate to decode, were not language. They were measurements, assessments, calculations of each man's cognitive capacity, his emotional reserves, his resistance to shock. The creature was evaluating each lookout the way a predator evaluates prey, not by size or speed, but by yield. How many years of conscious experience could be extracted from this mind before it emptied? The men who were found had not been broken. They had been drained. Their minds had not jammed like a broken gear. Their minds had been consumed slowly, cleanly, completely leaving the body running like a clock with no hands. The years they spent in sanitariums and family homes, staring at walls with open eyes, were not years of catatonia. They were years of harvest. The creature was still feeding on them, at distance, for as long as the body lasted. 34 years from William Cartwright, 12 from Thomas Dane, 27 from Arthur Pell. I turned to the final page of the creature's entry and found the 1874 lookout. His name was James Oren. I had not known his name until that moment. The creature knew it. The creature had always known it. The inventory for James Oren was longer than any other because the creature had noted something additional. Beneath the standard measurements, it had written, attachment bond, daughter, Clara, age 7. Emotional density, extraordinary. Yield, 27 years, residual cognition. Note, bond sustained yield beyond projected capacity. Recommend retention of attachment subjects in future selections. The creature had noticed that James Oren's love for his daughter had made his mind richer, denser, more productive. The cognitive energy generated by a man longing for a child he couldn't reach had been a better harvest than the empty fear of men with nothing to love. That was why James Oren had lived 27 years after being found. His love for Clara had been fuel. The creature had fed on his grief and his longing, and the endless, unresolvable ache of a father who couldn't remember his daughter's face, but whose heart kept reaching for her anyway. I closed the logbook. I opened it again. At the very end of the creature's entry, after the inventory, after the yields, after James Oren, there was one more line. My name. Samuel Harwick, 1888. Beneath it, the standard measurements. My patience threshold. My fear response time. My curiosity index. My breaking point listed as not yet reached. And then, yield, pending assessment. Note, subject-initiated contact. First direct address in 24 years of operation. Cognitive profile indicates low emotional density, but high structural resilience. Standard harvest unlikely to exceed 8 years. However, subject has developed posthumous attachment bond with previous subject, Oren, 1874, through retained correspondence. Emotional density increasing, reassessing. It was watching my emotional development the way a farmer watches a crop. The anger I had felt, the clean, righteous rage on behalf of James Oren and his daughter, had not been inconvenient to the creature. It had been nutrition. It had been the thing that made me worth keeping. My attachment to a dead man's letter, my fury at his fate, the part of me that had cracked open when I read about the pine cone as big as her head, all of it was yield. All of it was food. The creature hadn't been provoked by my letter. It had been pleased. I had made myself more valuable. The last line of the entry read, "Pending." I left the tower that morning. I did not wait for Harlan. I did not follow the trail. I went south, down the granite drainage, through scrub and scree, moving fast and not looking back. I carried the logbook in my coat. I carried the letter to Clara in my shirt pocket, against my chest, and I hated myself for carrying it, because I knew that the tenderness I felt for that letter was exactly what the creature was counting on. I reached the base camp by noon. I told the station chief I was done. He didn't argue. He looked at my face, and he didn't argue. I never went back to Elk Ridge. I burned the pencil rubbings. I did not burn the logbook. I told myself I kept it as evidence. I told myself I kept it because someone should know. But the truth, and I owe you the truth, because truth is the only thing I have left that the creature hasn't found a way to use, is that I kept it because I couldn't stop reading James Oren's entries. I read them in the evenings. I read the letter to Clara. I felt the ache of a man I never met missing a daughter I would never know, and each time I felt it, I knew I was generating exactly what the creature valued. I couldn't stop. I tried. For years I tried. I locked the logbook in a drawer. I kept the key on a cord around my neck. I told myself I would go a month without opening it. I lasted 11 days. The ache was always there, not the creature's doing, not some supernatural compulsion. Just grief. Simple, human grief for a man who deserved better. The kind of grief you can't reason away because it isn't unreasonable. It's just love with nowhere to go. I learned what happened to James Oren. He died in 1901 in a care home in Salem. His daughter Clara visited every Sunday until the end. She was 34 when he died. She never married. I learned this from county records because I went looking, because I couldn't help myself, because the creature had identified the attachment bond with perfect accuracy, and I was living proof that it was right. The Forest Service decommissioned Elk Ridge in 1903. Harlan Critchfield retired the same year. I wrote to him once. He did not write back. I am 84 years old. I have kept the logbook for 61 years. Every year, on the night that corresponds to my 7th night on the tower, I open the drawer and I check. The entry with my name, the measurements, the word, pending. For 60 years, it did not change. This year, it changed. The word pending has been crossed out. The line through it is fresh, dark ink, still faintly tacky when I touched it, applied with the same heavy pressure that characterizes every mark the creature has ever made. Beneath the crossed-out word, in that same hand, is a date. It is 3 months from now. I don't know what happens on that date. I don't know if the creature comes for me, or if something simply switches off. The way it switched off in William Cartwright and Thomas Dane and James Oren and every other man whose yield was calculated and whose harvest was scheduled. I don't know if I will be found, alive, empty, staring at a wall while something feeds on the last reserves of a mind that it has been monitoring for 6 decades. But I know this. The letter to Clara is still in my shirt pocket. I have carried it for 61 years. It is soft as cloth. The ink has faded to the color of old tea. I can recite it from memory: the pine cone, the sleeping giant, the promise to come home before the snow. And I know that every time I think of it, every time I feel that ache, I am feeding something that I cannot see, in a forest I will never return to, on a ridge where the towers are gone and the trees have closed over the granite like a wound healing shut. I am still generating yield. I have been generating yield since 1888, and in 3 months, the harvest comes due. The logbook of Tower 4, Elk Ridge, was donated to the Oregon Historical Society in 1949 by an anonymous benefactor. It is catalogued as Frontier Fire Service Ephemera, 1866 to 1888, and is available for research access by appointment. The final 3 pages are in a hand that the Society's archivists have been unable to identify. A note in the catalog entry, added in 1987 by a graduate student who examined the pages under magnification, reads, "Final entry appears to contain a list of names and dates. Several dates are in the future. Request further analysis." No further analysis was conducted. The file was closed. The last name on the list is not Samuel Harwick. It is the name of whoever requested access to the logbook most recently. The date beside it is tomorrow.